This episode of The Tome Show is brought to you by listeners like you. Thank you for being patrons at patreon.com/The Tome Show. Welcome to The Tome, a D&D news, reviews, and interview show, and I'm your Tome host, Jeff Greiner.
And I'm Tracy Hurley. In this episode, number 392, we're going to take a little bit of monster lore out there and try to craft some stories around it.
Joining us for this episode is the co-creator of 13th Age. He also worked at Wizards in the 3rd edition era and helped lead the design team for 4th edition. And it's been years since he's been on the show. Welcome, Rob Heinsoo.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. I'm glad to be back.
Excellent. And also on the team tonight is another former wizard, now working for Avantris, Dimension 20, the podcast Critical Lit, and who knows what other crazy things he might be working on out there. It's also been years since we've been able to chat with him. It's Dillon.
Hi, I'm thrilled to be back. Thanks for having me on.
And if I recall from our email exchange before this, is this the first time the two of you have actually met?
It is, yeah.
We're both nodding, so that means the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Once in a while, you've met somebody at a table, and you're like, "Oh, hey," but I don't think so. I think we would have remembered each other.
Two former wizards that missed each other, so
yep,
very good.
That'll happen.
So in this episode, we're going to discuss how to take the sometimes often scant lore presented in monster books and then flesh them out into stories, ignoring all the canon that might exist across different sources of lore so that we can create something that's good for our tables.
Right. And this to give you a sense, the inspiration for this came from the many part review we're doing of the new Monster Manual and noticing how much the lore in that book has been cut down even compared to what it was in previous books. Although it's very common for monster books to still have very, very little lore. And depending on the game, you'll pull out some games and there's like almost no lore and you're just making it all up from scratch. So, So yeah, how do you take these handful of paragraphs and turn that into something that you can structure an adventure around? Because it's not unusual to have adventures that are sort of based around like, hey, here's a cool monster, let's put a big huge spotlight on him and make this whole story sort of around this creature. So let's talk about how to do that. And I thought the first thing we could do is let's create some nice, easy to follow steps for listeners to follow, that they can go along themselves and play along in the home game and design their own adventures around the lore. So, and I don't know how many steps it'll be because I didn't want to like sketch out what I thought it might be and then like skew things. I want the four of us to sort of flesh this out together. So who has a good idea of what our first step should be?
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
Because I'm really psyched to hear that, like, when Tracy said, all right, we're ignoring canon.
Yeah.
I think the situation that books like the Monster Manual gets into is that it's trying to offend no tables.
Right.
It's trying to create a default that can slip into the greatest number of campaigns, and to be clear, that will match all future publications. Right. So by definition, the monster books published by major companies that are then producing a canonical line are not going to be advancing that monster's cause, and stake as the coolest thing. And it's also not going to be doing wild ass, interesting storylines. But I think what you're asking us is, okay, let's pretend we're not going ahead and writing the book for that company. Let's go ahead and like craft interesting adventures out of the core of a monster.
So taking the lore that we do have, how do we take that, analyze it, expand it, and turn it into something that works at our table for our stories?
And do we want to do it for the maximum number of people, as in, okay, do we want to do it with options that we're empowering game masters and people to go ahead and like make up their own? Or do we want to make up one really specific, absolutely badass, weirdo thing?
I want to start with general, like, here are the steps to follow. and create a process that anybody can follow for their own game, and then if, with whatever time we have, we'll throw out some examples and get real specific and just make something that's really cool, just the four of us that we all like.
Yeah, I think general tools first is the way to go, and you're absolutely right, Rob. The particularly the D&D core books, since D&D is made up of so many different worlds, and things that have the same base can be wildly different from one world to another depending on what you're looking at. Like, look at goblins in the Forgotten Realms versus goblins in Eberron. They're just completely, like, culturally and historically different. So the core books can only do so much before you start messing with one or more of those if you get too specific.
So in other words, one of the first steps might be, since we're providing this as a step-by-step guide for individual game masters, decide which, if any, established background you're trying to like make your monster fly in, or if you're really going to do your own thing and it's your own game, like sort of a setting. Like what is the target?
I think there are steps before even that, because we want to ground it at least in whatever lore is there in the book. And so I think the first thing to do is actually do some analysis of that lore. Look through those paragraphs and maybe identify some keywords or concepts that you think are evocative.
Yeah, I mean, the first step has to be read the monster, right? Read all of its lore text, read all of its stat block, all of its traits, all of its actions, everything it's got going on, just so you know what's there and what you can work with.
Yeah.
So if you want to, you had a list of things we might play with.
I will definitely say.
Step one is read the monster. Step two, identify key concepts, either in the lore or in the stat block.
Exactly.
And I'm a little bit of a contrarian, so I can tone this down completely. I think you're right about the steps. I do think when you said if you're going ahead and keeping the lore that's there, one of the interesting things about game masters designing their own stuff is it's nearly always the case that people like to surprise people with the contrary example. I mean, if you open the book up and you find Modrons, like one of the ways to like use Modrons is to be like, oh my God, in this particular universe, chaos took over the Modrons. And like, although they look lawful, they're not, and so I guess that uses the Modron, but I mean, it does also flip it. And there is a question mark, I think one of the steps of analysis is going to be really use stuff there, or are you getting more juice out of flipping some concepts?
Well, I think there's value in, like, I think it's like the rules of writing. Like, you have to know the rules before you can break the rules. I think it's valuable to really analyze what the key concepts are that are listed before you decide whether or not you want to twist those or no, it's coming later. Yeah.
I'm going to just go ahead and admit something, and that is that as far as new numbered steps go, you guys have the floor, man. I'll have ideas. Don't take any numbers I suggest. So,
That's fine.
But I think, kind of jumping off a little bit, if it's okay, just real quick. The idea of playing with something, you also have to consider who is at your table too, because like if you have brand new people, it's very hard in some ways to necessarily play with it if you want them to have the reaction. If you just want to play with it because you're playing with it, that's fine.
You can't subvert expectations if they don't have any expectations.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Another important early consideration is, are you using a specific setting with specific conceits or themes or tropes, right? Are you running in a published setting? Are you doing your own? Is there something funky weird about your setting that you're doing, that you're either looking to mold a generic monster to fit that, or are you looking for a monster that already fits it kind of out of the box?
And that actually gets to something that Rob was saying earlier, which was about how does this creature fit into the world and the lore of the setting, and so I think that may be our step 3 is, okay, we've identified key concepts for the monster. Now, how do those concepts, what does that actually mean in this setting? The monster's manipulative and controlling. Okay, so what does a manipulative and controlling creature look like in a setting that's all about like political intrigue versus farmsteads out in the countryside or whatever?
And so right there is actually something when I'm building an encounter, if we're talking about building an encounter specifically, I'll always think early about what's the point of this encounter? Like, what do I want to be fun about this? What do I want to get out of it? Mm-hmm. If I want it to be, a knockdown, drag out slugfest where everyone is getting just pummeled and shredded, I'm going to skip all of the sneaky, intriguey, magically inclined things almost entirely and go straight for brutes and bruisers. So like, do you have a purpose in the encounter that you're designing that's going to guide what you're looking for?
So I think that maybe our next step is to identify the purpose of the encounter, or blow it up to the adventure, if you want to think of it larger than a single encounter.
Yeah.
So read the monster, identify key concepts in the lore and the stat block, figure out how those concepts apply to the setting, identify the purpose of the encounter or adventure, and that might be the point where we want to then address what Rob was talking about earlier, which is, okay, at this point, do we want to consider whether or not we want to subvert expectations or reinforce them?
Yeah. And Tracy's point there was really important. Know
I like that.
Table. Does everybody know what an invisible stalker is before you start messing with what it does?
Like if you want to build an adventure around subverting the expectations around Modrons, right? You want to have the arch villain Modron instead of the quirky, goofy Modron or whatever. Have them start off by going into a settlement of Modrons and figuring out what Modrons are like, and then.
Actually, when I think about it, some of the most embarrassing and funny stories that I've been around in gaming have been because of that thing, Tracy, of like the game master deciding, I've got this really cool story, and everybody just being like, we didn't
we don't get it.
Play that module. So yeah. It's good.
Randy Walker and I think on one of our podcasts way a long time ago, we talked about elves because he plays with a lot of kids who never had necessarily seen Lord of the Rings yet. So there had only one concept of what an elf was. And
Keebler?
Santa.
Yeah, Keebler or Santas or whatever, right? So yeah, that really stuck with me.
I gotta say, it'd be a big surprise when that elf shoots you with a longbow. So yeah.
Yep.
It's for you.
So we've figured out our monster. We've integrated them into the setting. We figured out the purpose of our encounter or adventure. We've decided whether we're going to subvert or reinforce expectations. It feels now like it's time to start like putting some meat on these bones. Does that feel right, or am I missing something else?
No, it feels good.
So if we have that skeleton built, then what's the next step to figuring out what this story is going to be, what this adventure is going to be?
I mean,
when you're writing a short adventure, what's one of the first steps?
You're nearly always you're searching for a hook.
A hook?
Like a hook. The hook is the thing that if you're just starting a monster from scratch and designing a monster and you're already in this milieu, then one of the hook is the thing that makes it worthwhile. It's either the experience, usually it's the experience you want your players to have that is somehow different from other experiences with other monsters. And so in the long run, as far as monster design goes, that is what you're looking for. So maybe it's just the thing to keep in mind. Like, that's the target, I think.
So why is this story going to be worthwhile?
Yeah.
Okay. When you say hook, I oftentimes default to like hooking the characters into the story, like the thing that you do at the beginning. So.
Which I'm not. Yeah, which I don't mean. It's more
that's not. Yeah, I got that. Yeah. Eventually. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, if we're talking about building, an adventure from the ground up, you're looking for what the conflict of that story is that the players are going to get involved with and hopefully change in some way.
Yeah, so if we're basing it around a specific monster or whatever, a lot of times, I know, and you've all done this more successfully than I have, but in my head, I oftentimes start at the end, like what is, so we know who the villain is, what are they trying to do? and then we can sort of expand that out to what conflict is that creating? Why are other people noticing it? How are the heroes going to come in and stop it? That sort of thing. But I have to understand what they're trying to do, what their goal is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
It does make sense. The weird thing is, I think I don't know. These are all at this stage when creativity starts churning stuff up. I'm not positive how closely the creativity sticks to the numbers. Like,
no, absolutely.
Like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's like 5, 6, 7, and 8 are right.
No.
They're all swirling around.
I absolutely agree that oftentimes the inspiration hits and it's not hitting in order, and that's fine. But I think it's still worth at least putting together a formula, even if if people don't usually follow it.
Yeah, a thing that's going to be important to keep in mind here is that you can jump this track at any time when something grabs a hold of your imagination.
Right.
And you might have to backtrack and revisit things.
Yeah, and like for instance, trying to figure out what the villain is doing, that kind of presupposes that you're doing something where there's a villain in like an escalation of events versus more of a sandbox where they can build their own story from the pieces you're giving them.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, and some of it is like, what scope are we working on here? That's
ambition.
Change how you change how you
exactly.
How you interact with these steps. Are we looking to do a one session thing? Are we looking to plan an arc, a campaign arc? That's going to look very different.
Yep, I agree. So,
and but that's a decision that I would feel comfortable making while creating it. It's sort of like, because sometimes it's like, well, this is cool, but how cool is it? It's not that cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So based off of what I've been hearing in our conversations here, I've maybe wrapped up with 10 total steps. So we've talked about 1 through 6. Step 7, then figure out what the villain is trying to do. 8, how does that create conflict? 9, how do the characters get involved in the conflict? 10, how do they resolve the conflict? And that's more or less the outline of an adventure. Tracy, you look like you have thoughts.
Well, I would say I think there's a layer too, though. Once you have a decent idea of what you want these creatures or monsters or whatever to be in your adventure, go back and put in hints if you have time and want to, and this is something that your table likes or you like, to really help then tell that story, right? Because we still haven't necessarily told the story of those creatures or provide information about them, really. Like we said what they want to do. We know what their stat block and maybe the little bit of text says, but like what kind, think of things that are grabbing, that would grab interest, but would help provide the hints. Like a lot of video games do this in the background. And just think if there's ways you can sprinkle that through to reinforce what you're trying to do. Yeah,
that's a good. I added that as a step 11. Like now, go back and make sure that your story and your lore is being told throughout the whole adventure, and that you're sprinkling those moments in. That's good. Any other steps that are worth squeezing in somewhere or adding on? Or do we feel good about taking this, our 11 steps for a spin and seeing how it actually plays out? See if what we've brainstormed in 15 minutes actually is worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that's the important next overall step.
And then
pick one and see how it goes.
Yeah, and then maybe people will hear how we do it and be inspired, or hear some cool ideas, or find out exactly how not to do it. Time will tell. So I have sketched out 4 potential creatures that are largely based on what and how much lore there are in the newest monster manual. And I wanted to give you some options. So I have 1 undead creature, 1 fiend, 1 aberration, and 1, I think, monstrosity. So what do we want to start with? We're moving pretty quick, so we might have time to do several of these.
Give us a fiend.
All right. So the fiend that I chose, do you want me to tell you the name, or should I just read the description and we can go from there so we don't have preconceived notions?
Interesting.
I mean, I'm fine to tell us the name and then just look it up, follow along, all that good stuff.
It's a fiend that is not as heavily used throughout the lore anyway, because I chose a Yugoloth, specifically the Ultraloth.
Love Yugoloths.
Oh, they're one of my favorites, but they don't show up very much in adventures. So the Ultraloth, who in the 2024-25 version of the Monster Manual, they like to give little like taglines. Dan, did you work on this book at all? Okay, so you're.
I did not. I did not work on the Monster Manual.
Okay.
I was nodding about the taglines, the little subtitles that every monster gets, and that was my first thing. Is like the very first thing you do is read that, because this is, Ultraloth is a Yugoloth of conspiracy and control.
Yes.
That tells you right there like what's its overall shtick.
Yep, and then you've got you've got a paragraph and like 2 sentences afterwards. And the paragraph is, and I'll just read it for everybody. With uncanny patience and fiendish cunning, Ultraloths manipulate mortals and their fellow Yugoloths alike. Seeking to hoard power and spread suffering, these sinister masterminds often work with other Yugoloths, but they might compel nearly any creature into their service. If coercion doesn't work, Ultraloths use their eerie eyes and innate magic to hypnotize or charm targets. They strive to achieve planes-spanning plots, and then there is a randomized chart of different conspiracies they might be involved in. Which actually could be useful because it gives you some sense of like the kinds of things.
These are super useful. I love the prevalence of flavor tables in this Monster Manual.
No, and it gives us this like telling us that a creature is a manipulator and involved in conspiracies is useful, but giving us this list of specific types of conspiracies, even if you're not taking one of them and running with it, gives you a sense of like, okay, but this is what they mean by conspiracies. So in this case, it's
exactly.
It's convincing cultists that their god has forsaken them, destabilizing a nation and rule the chaos, incite a calamity and hold a world hostage, provoke hostilities between immortal armies, and sell magic weapons to both sides. You're getting the sense that like these aren't conspiracies that are being whispered in tavern rooms in Shadowdale or whatever. This is conspiracies on a grand scale. The smallest conspiracy is really a conspiracy of like destabilizing an entire country.
Yeah. Everything here in these schemes is like nation level or bigger. So
right. Yeah. So that gives us a sense of where they're at. And as I look through because we talked about it in our steps to read through the stat block as well. I'm looking through their stat block to see if there's things that stand out. I think it's worth noting that they have telepathy and true sight. I think those things are meaningful. Depending on the storyline, fiendish restoration could be important because you can't just kill them off of their home plane without them coming back. The text actually talked about their hypnotic gaze, so clearly that's and then their spell casting, so clearly those are important things to consider. I think it's also worth noting for homebrew adventure writing and whatever. When a creature like this has the spellcasting trait and then they list a group of spells, like I think it's acceptable to consider what replacement spells might make sense, or swap some spells out, or give them an extra spell or so that are non-combat spells that might be meaningful if they're going to be sort of the larger villain. And I think all of that's acceptable as well.
Yeah, for sure. If you're not comfortable designing monsters, though, be very wary of swapping out spells that have combat effect. Mm-hmm. Like they have the ability to cast, once per day, they can cast a level 5 fireball. If you're going to drop that, you should replace it with something that is commensurate in damage output, or effective damage output if you know how to gauge those sorts of things. Otherwise, my recommendation is don't mess with those particular levers if you're not sure about how that's going to affect things, because you can grossly weaken or overblow your monster by messing with those.
Swapping out a level 5 fireball with a level 5 lightning bolt is easy, but swapping it out with like a disintegrate might be a different story.
Yeah, it's gonna be a different animal. Yeah.
So, I think even some of the other like less iconic, to the point that they weren't mentioned in the lore, abilities like the Mercurial Whip is interesting because they can whip things from 15 feet away, but then also teleport them when they whip them, and they have bonus action spell casting as well. That's plays into their being the sort of spellcaster villain. Also, so
right. So a couple major things stand out to me before we start thinking about a combat context, and one is the spellcasting, where they have alter self and clairvoyance at will, so they can physically look like other things, other people, to disguise themselves and blend in. And they're really good at spying on you if they know where to look or listen. And so they can gather a hell of a lot of information, and they can be the right person to whisper in whatever ear they want. They can get access to a lot of people, and they can get immense amounts of knowledge if they know where and when to look for it. And then in the bonus action, now this has a recharge that only really matters in combat, but they have on tap mind control. Like they can just suggestion all day to get things done and to move pawns into where they need them to be. So they have a lot of manipulation tools at their disposal.
So a couple things that I noticed. I guess three things that I'll just, if you are you okay with me saying three things? Just stack them up. We'll see if they're worth it. One of them is that I was monsters that go ahead and control people's minds and also look like other things are very sometimes a challenge to use for game masters, because the truth is that they destroy the trust of the players in the game masters NPCs in the world. So the weird part about it is that if this is happening, it's either got to be, it's probably a huge exception, or it's what this campaign lives on all the time. You know, there's this element of like, well, it can be really hard. And I've had groups and tables that just did not want to be fooled in this particular way, because it's sort of like, what do you want us to do? Like be nasty to NPCs all the time and suspicious and paranoid? You know, that's not our game. And so I sort of, the Yugoloth thing about getting information and stuff, I totally understand. The alter self is a little bit, I might find a way to be like, this guy's got a problem. He's locked in until he dies in this incarnation. He's locked into shape. You know, he can suggest all he wants, but what you see is what you get. I love
one note on that is I hear where you're coming from on that big time, but usually I think that problem comes about when this villain, monster, whatever, plays the part of an ally and then backstabs the party. Right. So if they're playing the villain from the get-go, and the only part you don't know is that they're a Yugoloth and not some, dwarf noble who's building a corrupt
or whatever,
mercantile empire. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good point.
If the dwarf baron who's been doing shady, political and economic stuff and is taking over city after city in this nation, like they know that's a villain. It's not going to destroy their trust in their allies if this then turns out to be this massive, powerful fiend. If it was their mentor or their patron who was sending them to do things and then turns on them and is the villain, I'm absolutely with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I agree. And
luckily, be careful training your players to not trust the NPCs.
and it's also worth noting, their version of mind control is suggestion, which is more or less at will, but at least suggestion isn't like a mass mind control thing. It's a more subtle. It's a the example I threw out earlier. It's a little bit of the Grima Wormtongue sort of manipulation of the king sort of thing, more than taking away agency from the players. Is how I would play it out.
Here's
And the
something fun.
interesting
Go ahead.
thing about that is where it talks about provoking hostilities between immortal armies. This particular trick, like using suggestion and the like, won't work if those immortal armies are like devils and demons fighting each other and a bunch of them are immune to being charmed. So they'll have to hit the lower level minions of the immortal armies and work up from there. So that could be interesting.
There's a part of me that loves the fact that random roll number 1, it just suggests something. It says, convince cultists their god has forsaken them. So one of the most amusing ways to use this in adventure would be if, yes, this guy is the villain. However, the current thing he's screwing up is really evil people who he hates. And the player characters have the situation where, if you thwart him, he's not going to f*** up that cult or whoever it is. And because that creates this really delicate balance of, we have to work with this guy?
Right. He's messing with the cult of Vecna. On one hand, I don't want to help Vecna, but on the other hand, this guy's screwing up the local village or whatever. So
well, no, maybe he was. Right now, he's not doing that. He's hitting out the cult of Vecna.
Right.
I mean, yeah. So, he looks like a Vecna killer. Now, when you're around him for a minute, you realize, oh my God, for example, he's the worst boss I've ever had, and he's evil incarnate, but he's doing God's work.
So I think that's where it's useful now to go into our step 3, which is think about how this plays into our setting. And we haven't identified a setting.
Right.
So, and we could create a setting on our own, or just say it's going to be homebrew, whatever, and make it up as we go, and all that's fine too. How do you all want to do it? Do we want to pick a setting, or make something up as we go and go more homebrew generic, or what?
Yeah, I think we can go a little more generic just to make it sort of generally useful as we go through with these. Do we want to roll one of their schemes, or make up one along like in this vein?
I think for our purposes, I like the idea of looking at those for inspiration, but then making up our own little thing. I mean, and if we want to play with one of those, then that's fine too. But Tracy, you were going to say something?
I was gonna say one thing that the table itself and all of the abilities and the things we talked about suggests is that there's got to be multiple creatures, and probably multiple times you see this villain or interact with indirectly, maybe even with the villain, right? Because it's kind of hard to show a conspiracy in just one encounter.
Yeah. Yes. I mean,
That's
definitely more than one encounter. I feel like if I really tried to keep it buttoned and bottled up, you could maybe pull it off in a session or a one shot. But even then, it wouldn't be too grand of a conspiracy, or it would be a grand conspiracy that the players came into, at the end game and missed all the stuff leading up to it.
Well, like the cultist one, I think could fit into a session probably fairly easily, unless you have significantly invested role players that take a long time per scene.
So here's a thought. If we're thinking about this individual in sort of a big bad of a campaign, or just kind of higher tier play sense, and we're thinking about introducing them multiple times to really show this conspiracy and build layers of it. So we might be thinking on a campaign planning level here, rather than something more granular like a singular adventure. So maybe we've decided this is going to be our campaign villain. And one of the important things is going to be to introduce them early, but not directly necessarily. So let's say they're doing their thing where they're impersonating a mortal noble to accomplish their ends. So overall, their goal is something inspired by this list, but not on it. But one of their lower rank goals, let's go with the cultist one. I like bringing that up. So convincing cultists that their god has forsaken them. So on a lower tier adventure, you have this creature behind it, but obviously your level 3 characters aren't going to fight a CR13 Yugoloth. What kind of sadistic DM are you? but you can use them to set the scenario up. And so this noble has been doing shady things that has come to the attention of the party, or they have been hired by their benevolent patron who has been getting squeezed out by this rival. They start looking into it, and their investigations might lead them to this shady organization that is a front for a cult that this rival noble has been messing with in some way, that leads them to the cult that this Yugoloth in disguise is trying to undercut and maybe trying to subvert and take control of it by making the cult believe that their gods have forsaken them, and this new puppet god it's setting up will be their return to power, and that's what's going to subvert that cult, and then this villain will be able to use that cult as its cat's paws and pawns going forward. And so one of the lowest, like tier 1 or 2 adventures might be discovering a cell of this cult and thwarting it. And that's where you start to get the first breadcrumbs that are going to point to this this individual who turns out to be a giant fiend.
I mean, the schemes that are there could actually all, like, if you're talking campaign level, I could see a Yugoloth doing 1, 2, 5, 6, all in service of 3, or there's ways of, if you're going to do multiple adventures with the same villain, that you could sort of incorporate a bunch of them into it.
Yeah, and maybe the Ultraloth's overarching goal, which is going to be the ultimate campaign goal, is for it to overthrow some sort of demon lord level Yugoloth, one of the generals of Gehenna or something like that, and usurp their place. Which would all of these smaller things are going to be pieces on the game board. It's moving in service of that ultimate goal.
Which would be a heck of a reach for a CR13 Yugoloth, and thus the manipulation and conspiracy.
Yep.
Do the heroes learn that eventually by putting things together and then have decisions to make?
That's exactly my thought. Yeah. Because like this thing is going to maybe topple a much worse evil.
Right.
Do you want to stop it?
Right.
So it sounds like we are identifying what the villain is trying to do, which for our adventure is take control of a cult and establish sort of its new puppet god that's not even a real god, sort of channel their worship towards him or them for manipulation, with a larger maybe campaign arc of, and all of this is an effort to overthrow some sort of demon lord level Yugoloth, which should have some sort of a name, but here we are. I don't know, Archdevil, Demon Lord, I don't know what the name is for Yugoloth. So
yeah.
I wonder if we want to have times where we can show, maybe not through like combat encounters so much, but some sort of vignette or something else, that they're just casually making people like suddenly do something that they didn't initially want to, or something like that, just where you can show the manipulation without in a way that aids the story but isn't like directly against the player characters.
Yeah. There's a couple of ways you could do that. You can do that indirectly, where you investigate and get stories of people's behavior changing in strange ways, informed by people who know them, like city officials making some very out of character decisions and shifting policy in strange ways. And if you trace it back far enough, you learn that, well, hey, all of these things happened after they had a meeting with this envoy. And then, it's kind of scattered. No one would really know if you didn't specifically look for it. But now that you know, this envoy has met with these 6, city officials throughout this city-state, and all of these decisions, when you look at them together, they're starting to paint a picture of a goal, a shift. Something is happening. These things are all working together, but it's subtle enough that if you didn't look for it, you wouldn't see it.
So we've kind of, as we discussed at the beginning, we set out 11 steps, but we also said don't worry about like following them necessarily linearly, because we kind of went 1, 2, 3, 7. But then in our conversations, I think we've been backfilling some of the others as well. So it seems like the purpose of this adventure is to sort of show the beginnings of this creature's larger machinations, that we are reinforcing expectations of what an Ultraloth is. We're not trying to subvert and have the lawful good Ultraloth come along to save the day or anything. Although there could be a later adventure where there was a companion, the twin brother Ultraloth, who's the good guy or whatever. Who knows?
I'm not knocking it.
But I don't think that's where we're at here.
Correct.
We haven't talked. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
Well, I don't know if this is the finale. I don't think it is, because not with the thing we're talking about with archvillain, demon lords, and stuff.
Yeah.
But all the powers this guy has, and this whole mercurial whip, which is just a little bit funky ass, like, hi, I'm teleporting you with a mercurial whip. I mean, and it's like, okay. Can it use that to teleport itself too? It already has Dimension Door. It has Missy Step. It has invisibility. It has Ultra Self. The funniest thing about this is this creature is made to flee. At the point that the player characters get to be really powerful and interesting, the adventure that I would love to run with this thing would be like a heist film's getaway scene with this thing, like escaping through dungeon, dimension, city, etc., and the player character behind it. What is that guy? Is that a guard or is that the Ultraloth? I don't know. We just killed him. The guard. And moving on, because
and maybe
a lot of stuff to get away.
If at that point they don't yet know it's an Ultraloth, so they don't know what they're dealing with, but
they don't know what they're dealing with. It starts
to reveal, all right, this thing is not what he's
That's right. We're chasing the noble one. What the he teleported to the top of that wall? Okay. I kind of like that as a scene that reveals it in a really fun way. Also, we don't usually run chase scenes. I don't know. I don't necessarily. When like a monster trying to get away from battle and getting shot by a fireball does not count as a chase scene.
Nope.
So yeah, it's really fun.
I love the concept of chases, but unfortunately, the D&D chase system trips for me in one important place where it still really boils down to fastest guy wins, because it still just respects your speed and how far you can move.
Yeah,
I think we could tweak that by taking speed as a specific trait out of it and using ability checks instead to kind of gain and lose distance. Then that makes it much more exciting and actually makes it a chase.
And especially if you spliced combat moments in there, like, okay, with this one, there's going to be one attack roll, and then, but only one. Yeah.
Or, he's fleeing. He charms one of the elite guards and they stand in your way and you have to dispatch them fast enough that he doesn't escape.
For this situation, for this story, I think we don't even use the chase mechanics. At least if I'm DMing it, I probably don't even use the chase mechanics so much as there's a series of encounters as you're chasing this thing, and you have to overcome the obstacles of wait a minute, who's the bad guy in this crowd of where I'm trying to, and maybe I don't know that they can alter self or turn invisible,
and how many. You could actually even do a thing where you're keeping track of how many actions it takes to get to deal with the thing, and then that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that's getting into. We're starting to talk now about how do the heroes resolve the conflict, because we want them to get involved in this. Clearly they'll need to ferret out who the bad guy is, and then engage in this sort of chase to get to them.
At the very end, they catch him. The mercurial whip makes a door, and he disappears. And they're like, "Oh, it's Gehenna. What do we do?"
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I love it. I was going to say, and we're also kind of jumping around in campaign timeline because them discovering that a cult is being manipulated happens way earlier before they're now physically chasing the evil baron through the castle dungeons and out into across the city rooftops, right? That's levels and levels later.
Although I could see within we could still do the sort of chase thing within the ferreting out the guy who's manipulating the cult thing.
Oh yeah.
That could still be the resolution to this. It's just framed in a different way.
Well, Fallen, right? When the time is on my side, and I forget if it's a demon or what, but it's jumping between people and saying the same thing over and over again, and it's like this really, to me, interesting scene, thing to experience.
Yeah. It was a fallen angel. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's dig into sort of the roots of where this storyline is coming from. Then we talked about reinforcing the expectations for this Yugoloth, this Ultraloth, and we've talked about what the villain is trying to do, subverting this cult. with as an eye towards its later goals and how this fits into that. Why is this story worthwhile compared to telling this story with other creatures?
So this particular creature is going to lead you in the extraplanar direction, right? So if you're not wanting to do that, then an Ultraloth is not the way to go here. But presumably you want to get into the planar politics of these weird mercenary fiend guys, and what machinations he's doing. So this is gonna draw you from your world into a much broader multiversal perspective with the lens of Gehenna. Which
I think that's an interesting way to take that, right? You could do this.
Like you could do similar things with a vampire, but it's going to be very different themes.
Yeah,
or a doppelganger.
Yeah. So this gives it an extra planar angle to it. We know what they're trying to do. How does the Yugoloth taking control of a cult create conflict that the players are going to care about?
So we started with this rival noble is doing something that is going to be detrimental to the player characters or their interests, right? Because their patron has warned them, hey, something strange is going on over here. Our rival is consolidating power. We need you to look into what they're doing and stop it if you can. And that leads them into this whole cult thing, which, cults are just fun conflict on their own. Because if there's some sort of, evil, wicked, underground hidden cult, now you get to decide, do you wipe out the cult to stop what they're doing? Do you expose them to the authorities and try to undermine their political position?
So part of me was going, because we mentioned Vecna earlier, right? A cult that involves secrets and manipulations and hiding and all that kind of stuff, right? And so if suddenly they're being subverted, it seems pretty easy to think that, oh, well, maybe the Yugoloth is having them be much more overt. So now the what used to be the cult of Vecna suddenly seems like more of a threat because we're noticing them because they're not so secretive anymore. And that's where our Baron, who maybe was a member of this cult of Vecna all along, is suddenly doing these things that counter the interests of our players or some NPC that's connected to the players or whatever, could suddenly be doing these things because they were a member of this covert cult that's now being more overt.
Right.
So it's a phase change on the cult scale.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. A cult going from subtle, covert evil to something more overt, militarized, direct, which feeds into Yugoloth versus Vecna cult a little bit better.
And it could be the case that the Yugoloth knows that the cultist will. It's like a suicide option. They're not going to survive this in the long run, but they're going to do a lot of damage.
Right. Well, yeah, because it occurs to me like being more overt definitely doesn't feel like the Ultraloth's MO, but manipulating other people into being overt while they hide in the shadows does.
Yeah.
Exactly. And let's say this cult was ultimately followers of the rival that the Ultraloth wants to unseat. So at the end of the day, the Ultraloth doesn't care if the cult starts following him or if Sir Stomp Evil and his crowd of do-getters come in and kill everybody. Either way, his enemies' minions are neutralized. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like that because one of the troubles with this scheme that we've attached to this idea of them subverting an evil cult. The trouble with that is as we mentioned earlier, like why do the players care? But now there's a reason for them to care, and at first glance it may even appear that like, oh, there's a new cult in town because they didn't realize that this cult had already been there for a long time, and then they learn the lore as they go along.
I love the idea, and I wouldn't do it for more than one session, but player characters trying to convince evil cultists, no, go back. You're not going to survive this. Mm-hmm. Go back underground. Look, we'll help you find a new identity.
Right? That's funny.
Yep. So then I think we've got the base. We got a lot of that base or foundation built. The next question we have then is how do the characters get involved? And I think we've even started to Dan. I think you've even started to hint at that. Is that maybe they're hired by the rival of the Baron, and the Baron is actually a member of the cult or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it could be as simple as evil cult does evil things. Heroes need to stop it. Right. We go very basic at the lower levels.
Or evil cult is being evil. That's how they get involved. There we go.
You know, it's heroes have usually very actionable motivations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I think that what Tracy said earlier about sprinkling moments, because now I'm jumping to 11.
Yep.
I do think that what's interesting is that the very first interactions the player characters have with this shouldn't be the cultists. It should be somebody else who's gotten manipulated and is acting really, really weird. And later on, after they've been dealing with a cultist for a long time, that's when they find out, holy, that other horrible problem that happened, that's also this guy's fault. You know, that would be, so not, the timing is, this cultists are second, maybe.
Right.
I could even see, I could see starting the adventure sort of in media res, like, we're already in the middle of an encounter, and that encounter deals sort of the prologue to a movie, right? That little scene where you see the heroes already in an action scene dealing with a thing, and then later on at the end of the movie, you find out, oh, even that little thing that didn't seem related and just was trying to introduce us to the characters was actually related all along.
Right.
Yeah, and speaking to what Tracy said earlier about making sure you go back and showcase these aspects and elements of the creature, the villain, the plot earlier. One tool that's really fun to use if your group is cool with it is the cutscene, where you actually cut and narrate, show what the villain is doing. And you can show them pulling one of these schemes or manipulating someone or flipping obviously using their magical manipulation powers to flip someone's mind. And, you know, depending on how comfortable you are doing that sort of thing and how comfortable your players are having sort of the third person omniscient view of what's going on and keeping that separate from their characters, that can be really, really effective and can be great at foreshadowing things the villain can do without even necessarily directly showing them, like without revealing that this is a Yugoloth.
Right. Because they're just seeing, you know, even in those interstitial moments, when you're narrating things that their characters can't actually know, you're still just describing this cultist who's manipulating the cult, and because they've got the alter self up or whatever.
You show them a cutscene, but you were lying, which is nice.
Or you're telling the truth but obscuring some important fact.
Oh,
right.
Yes.
Oh, Dan, I'm one of your players, and okay.
So, like, imagine in the aftermath of taking down the cult, the player characters are celebrating, and then you have a little meanwhile across the city, and you have the Baron receiving word that this cult was wiped out, and he leans back, and instead of shaking his fist and saying "Curse you, heroes," he smiles and pops a bottle of wine and pours himself a drink.
Yeah.
Perfect.
He does not seem to be concerned. Absolutely. And I love the idea of this opening scene where it's unrelated, and I kind of got inspiration from one of the other schemes that's on the list, and I think it could be something as simple as, like, you start in media res as the characters, the heroes have cornered a thief who was stealing some sort of magic item or invention, and it turns out that thief had been manipulated by the Ultraloth to do that, and you don't connect all the dots until the end. And so you've got this sort of introductory thing that's not even related, but maybe, you know, to then have it make sense for the players that it's not just this random encounter that didn't have anything to do with anything. Maybe that's what puts them on the radar of the noble who hires them to take care of the rival or take care of the cult or whatever. I like that.
Sometimes I get accused of being sand in the Vaseline. I'll just say this: the funniest little moment I have about this adventure is we're going to run this, and one of the players is going to be who read the monster manual, and he's going to be like, there was an invention, and then there was a cult. Hey, everybody, it's an Ultraloth.
Yeah.
Part of that is why I like getting inspiration from those charts and not necessarily
I
just
know exactly.
using them.
I know, it's like, in your own game, probably best to veer farther.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. It's funny.
So
And that depends, like, how many of your players are also DMs and are going to read a lot of these entries, that sort of thing.
Right. No, and so then from here, I think we've basically gotten down to like, okay, we've got them hooked in. We kind of know what's going on with the Ultraloth. We kind of know what's going on with the cult. Now, then it just becomes sort of an investigation the players have to go through, because stopping the actions of the cult is going to be difficult if you don't know what they're up to and you know what their scheme is, and B, stopping one branch of the cult doesn't do anything when the rest of the cult is still back at the hideout, and you got to sort of root them out at their foundation, you know. So then
what's the natural enemy of an Ultraloth in terms of like a cultist? Like, is it dragons? Is it snakes? Is it like,
So given that Yugoloths are kind of mercenary, it could be anybody.
Okay.
I mean,
So then we just have fun with it.
I'm trying to think of what the natural sort of alignment opposite on the Great Wheel sort of would be. I mean, definitely Celestials would generally be against them, but they're lawful good, not neutral good. Are the animal lords, are they neutral good?
We were talking about having an evil cult, so it feels like a devil cult, since those are way more likely to work subtly.
Yeah.
And then that's something that the Ultraloth could be manipulating into more overt, direct action.
Well, and it's worth noting, because they're mercenaries, because they're neutral in the middle of this blood war and everything else going on, the demons and devils can also be the natural enemies of the Yugoloths, but also sometimes allies. Like that's the craziness and the fun of the Yugoloths.
And like it said, the one thing where it said turning two immortal armies against each other and selling weapons to both sides, that could very easily be playing both sides of the blood war.
That's kind of what they're already doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they caused the blood war, but they're definitely taking advantage of it.
No.
So I think we've got the bones, the outline of the beginnings of a pretty good adventure using the Ultraloth. I don't think we have, given the time that we took more time doing that than we did coming up with our steps. I don't think we have time probably to get a second one in, as we're already approaching our hour. Does anybody have any sort of last thoughts of how our steps sort of held up to this practice of doing one of the other for your knowledge, the other ones that I had picked out were the undead was a white, or were whites. For the aberration, I chose Nothic, and for the monstrosity, I had ogre.
I love Nothics.
Nothics are all over the published adventures these days. So and ogres are classic, you know.
Oh, that's funny, because Nothics, I think that was when we did the miniatures handbook. Because I wanted to do a miniature. Yep. I wanted to do a miniature with a giant creature with an eye.
Is that where the Nothics came from?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. They are one of my favorite monsters. So thank you. So what I
think it was Mike Dene, Jonathan, Chris Pramus, was all of us together. But yeah,
I think since 5th edition came out, Nothics, Hags, and Modrons have been sort of the constant thing sprinkled in like all of the 5th edition published adventures.
So one thing I really like about the other monsters you picked is the low tier of play of them.
Yeah.
Those are all I think they're all tier 1, right?
Well, I mean, with the exception of the Ultraloth.
Yeah. The Ultraloth was like, whoa, man. Okay.
Yeah. So we built a campaign framework, because we even have great seeds to come up with what's going on in these other interim adventures in tier 2 and 3. We can come up with other schemes that this Ultraloth is doing or connected to.
No, we put together
the genesis of all this.
We put together one adventure, but that one adventure is clearly part of a larger campaign that's already
into
sketched.
A campaign, right? So, like, let's say you pick something like a Banshee. You're probably not going to get a whole campaign out of a Banshee. You're going to get an adventure, maybe an arc, depending on how much you want to get into, like, the Banshee's history and why it was cursed and what it's connected to in life these days. So that's something to think about when you're taking this approach. If you're going with lower CR, lower tier of play monsters, you're going to tighten your focus quite a bit.
Yep.
And it'll be one adventure, maybe even just one encounter.
And that's where wights would come in, or even Nothics or ogres. All of those would be a one adventure very easily, because the scope is going to be, they're not shaking things up so much that they're destabilizing whole countries and have large arcs around them. It's the ogres have moved into the nearby hills and have driven the orcs out or whatever. And now we're dealing with that, and that leads us up to figuring out why the ogres, or what's causing the orcs to go, whatever. That's a much smaller sort of storyline that might, it might be several sessions. You could put together several sessions of an adventure based around an ogre moved into town, but you wouldn't be able to do much more than that.
Right.
Good. Any other thoughts on how this process played out for us? I think we did a nice job of highlighting that you don't necessarily go in order, and we filled in every part of the step. We thought about every part of the step, but we didn't restrain ourselves to only doing them in the order that we wrote them.
Right. We did a lot of interconnecting the steps and jumping back to fill in gaps as they came up.
Yep.
So using these as tools and not a strict map that you can't deviate from is important.
Yep. Other thoughts?
That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that exercise. That's cool.
Yeah, and I think that I was expecting something more on the power level of Nothics wights, in that hitting the hitting the Ultraloth.
The Ultraloth was a curveball.
No way.
I mean, you had to guess when one of the options was a fiend that it was going to be higher level, because most of the fiends are. So
no, I guessed somewhere around CR5ish, right?
Okay. See, I'm always eager to bring Yugoloths in, because
I love Yugoloths.
They're underappreciated.
Yugoloths and Demodans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, good. Well, if you all ever want to get together, we can do a whole spin-off show where we just do this every episode. Pick a new monster. So
hey, I'm game to try out another one. That's fun.
There you go. Right on. Well,
yeah, I'd do it again.
If folks want to hear more of that, shoot me an email at thetomeshow@gmail.com, and I'll reach out and we'll schedule it and keep doing this every now and then. So we're going to go ahead and call this the end of the episode. I want to say thank you to our guest, Dan. If you want to let people know what you're up to these days, or where they can find you on the internets and find out more about what you're up to, this is your spot. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah. So I'm the lead tabletop role-playing game designer at Avantris Entertainment. You may know their wonderful work as the Legends of Avantris YouTube channel. If you ever see Chuckles the Clown or Bitsy the Mouse and their ridiculous shorts, that's them. We have our first major project, The Crooked Moon, out and available now. You can find it at thecrookedmoon.com and in local game stores. It's starting to trickle into real brick-and-mortar stores. Very exciting. And if you want to talk to me, you can hit me up on Blue Sky. I'm Dan Dillon at bsky.social, I think is how it goes. Yeah.
Right on. And you've also been working with a friend of the show, Brandis, on Dimension 20. Have you also been doing Worlds Beyond Number stuff with him?
Yep, I have had the delight and privilege to work on some Dimension 20, Little Worlds Beyond Number. I've also been working with a company called Accidental Cyclops on their Strange Hollow product, nice. on their book, which should be coming soonish.
Okay.
Yeah, very exciting.
Very good. And Rob, if people want to know more about what you're up to, or find you more on the internet and interact, what can they do to learn more?
Yeah, I'm at Rob Heinsoo on Blue Sky. And you can also find me at robhainsoo.blogspot.com. And just out right now and still in the middle of shipping is 13th Age 2nd edition. Labor of Love, which has turned out really well. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. So it hit the original goal, which was to make things that sucked not suck and to still be compatible. So
right on.
Yeah, It's been very fun.
Fantastic.
When I was in our Discord channel, I don't know, a month or so ago, asking folks like, hey, there's all these sort of D&D adjacent but not D&D games out there. Which ones should we check out? One of the ones that came up several times and that many people reinforced was like, oh, look at 2nd edition of 13th Age. And it's like, I will as soon as I can buy it. But right now it's on pre-order or whatever. So.
I think you could actually buy it from the Pelgrane store right now.
Okay.
And it would actually be, you'd get the PDF immediately.
Okay.
And then they'd be shipping in the next week or two.
Right on.
In America. This is dear Europeans. So sorry, it's still happening. But
okay.
Yeah.
A week or two ago, I think it still said it would pre-order, and it wouldn't allow me to order it yet. But maybe it's open now.
Okay.
I didn't know if they were trying to fulfill to the Kickstarters or whatever before they made it more publicly available. So.
Yeah, good question. And maybe I'm giving you the wrong information. So
no, by the time the episode comes out, it'll probably be available. So
yes, I think you're right. Yep.
So very good. All right. I also want to thank everyone who supports us by being patrons over at patreon.com/The Tome Show. Your support helps me pay the bills, and that makes the show possible. Thanks goes out to our higher tier supporters like Doug Palmer, Hyperlexic, Merrick Blackman, and Michael Harrison. And a special shout out goes out to Bill Rowdy and Trash Panda, two new patrons who recently joined us, just like you all can, for as little as $1 a month to help make the show as great as it can be. Thanks to all of our patrons for your support.
And as Jeff mentioned earlier, you can email us if you want to contact us, thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can find us on social media. I'm Sarah Darkmagic, that's Sarah with an H, and Jeff is Squatch, SQUACH.
On whatever various social media you want to hang out on. I think we're both on a lot of them.
Yeah.
If I throw another plug in here, can you tack it onto mine? I completely spaced.
Yeah, plug away.
And check out another fun role-playing game D&D adventure-related podcast I'm on called Critical Lit. Check us out on your favorite podcatcher.
Which I also mentioned at the top of the show. So
sorry, yeah. you did. Yeah. I appreciate it. Yeah, but we're going through classic D&D adventures, and we're working our way through Curse of Strahd. Currently, is our big project.
Which is interesting because Curse of Strahd is a newer adventure. Mm-hmm. When you say classic, I thought you'd be going back second.
Our very first was the original Tomb of Horrors, and we have also done the original White Plume Mountain as an interim during Curse of Strahd.
Very good.
We also did I6 to kick off into Curse of Strahd.
Perfect. I look forward to checking that out. I just found out about the show today, so it immediately went into my subscribe list. So, all right,
a lot of fun.
That is episode 392, where we took a few wisps of lore and turned them into stories. In this episode of The Tome.
I'm on the wall.